I guess what we're getting at is the brain is going through a critical development period to where it needs to learn or needs certain stimuli to enter like through the eyes or ears or something like that to make trigger certain mechanisms in the brain. So it's like the environment and the stimuli in the environment is working collaboratively with the genetics and all that stuff in the brain, to
Yeah.
form, those extremely important domains like vision, language.
Welcome back to Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, your hosts, get to talk about out of the box ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about the critical period of kid development. And this is really touching on topics about how this critical time period, uh, if one does not receive certain education or certain cues to help you learn certain life skills, it is definitely harder to learn them later on in life. So before we actually get started on the topic, I want to invite you guys to subscribe to our channel. We are completely committed to continue providing content for you guys. And so if you really like and seen our videos and like our content, please subscribe and also let us know what you think of the video today. So without further ado, I want to just kind of touch on the topics a little bit. Steele, do you have any starting thoughts on the critical period for kid development?
Yeah. So psychologists in the field of psychology have kind of made this or have developed theories that, in lifespan development, meaning like when we grow from when we're born to like when we die, that there's these critical periods early on in infancy that once you pass them up, like for vision, for example, or hearing or walking. And once you pass that up, the chances of being able to fully develop that area of the brain in order to be able to perform those behaviors, well, it diminishes significantly. Often, sometimes, to where people, where there's been like very rare cases, I think, where those like functions never really truly developed.
Mhm.
Like for example, I know I think we talked about before, where there's a child that locked up or something, and she never really developed the ability to speak language. And even after she was, rescued and all that, no matter how many therapists worked with her, speech therapists and all that stuff, she wasn't able ever to fully learn language, and speak in sentences. She did make
Yeah.
some progress though. She started speaking it with words, but yeah, once that critical period passed, they think that's the reason why, you know.
There's a name for that type of kid, right? The Pharrell
Yeah,
children.
yeah, and to clarify that, yeah, that's more of like kind of like children in the wild. That might kind of fit though, because technically she was deprived, right? So yeah, feral children, right? So
Feral children. Hmm.
left in the wild to fend for themselves and not be raised in society, basically.
Yeah, and that sometimes is because I've heard of stories such as these where you know unfortunately some kids they never grow up with anything, almost like as if they were dogs, right? They just feed them, they never talk to them, they only like um give them just only certain things. And these kids in a way sometimes like closed up and they never see daylight. It's just them, and they get fed, so they do have quote unquote like their necessities covered, but because they're deprived of being able to move, being able to walk, being able to go around and do other things, they never develop language, they never develop, maybe even never seen the daylight, that sort
Exactly.
of thing, only artificial light. So
Yeah,
these things are it makes you question how critical that time period is for kid development.
yeah. There's an interesting study related to that. Like it's published in the South African Psychiatry Review. It was called "A Feral Family on Our Doorstep," and they interviewed feral children, or not interviewed, but they studied feral children, right? So
Mhm.
psychiatrists, psychologists, and occupational therapists, and occupational therapy is about like physical stuff. So they, they found like one example they found of a feral child, a child left to fend in the wild without being raised. As you're kind of mentioning, the child was struggling with like bathing, with getting dressed, had trouble using a spoon, needed help with that, right? As you would expect. And what's interesting, the child was still able to show some emotion, like with smiling. So it's like, it's almost like a natural thing that you don't need to be taught. I don't know. And then nonverbal like gestures between like tribe members. So like the idea is that, I guess the child, I'm assuming for now, was in some type of tribe, right, away from society. So it's interesting, it brings in the question: are emotions kind of natural things? You don't need to be taught that like language. You know,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, yeah. I think the the more that we deprive uh a child from its basic needs, the more that they develop deficiencies in certain areas.
Mm,
It's almost like when kids are not exposed to social interactions, they tend to be a little bit more socially awkward just because they don't know how to actually deal with social interactions on the day-to-day basis. And so I think that that's just a simple example, but just to go into other areas, the body and the mind just don't develop in a certain way that is quote unquote normal in society, right?
yeah, because like an example I had mentioned, there was a study by some British scientists. It was a controversial one for this reason. They sewed a kitten's eyes shut during a certain, early period of development. And what happened is the kitten's vision, even after they unsewed the eyes and let the kitten see, their vision was permanently like affected by it, and it wasn't able to fully develop. So it makes you wonder, and like with the feral children, we could take those two together and kind of speculate: are these critical periods in development and infancy where like once you pass them up, you can't there's no second chance, like once the brain like kind of develops, right? Because we know the brain stops developing or maturing by the age of like 25, give or take. So makes you wonder, like infancy, like neurons, there's so many neurons, right? And they're going about, right, forming. So once that brain development passes that stage, whatever, for whatever reason, there's like a stage where we have to develop vision the proper way or language the proper way. Like the question is like, once you pass it up, is there like no going back? Seems like it. you know
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something that seems very evident, right?
yeah,
Like I think that's why it's really important to have certain things in the development stages, because later on it's not something that can be trained. It's almost like setting up its roots on like how one's going to grow up, right? And if it's lacking certain things, it just won't grow the same way or
yeah,
how it's supposed to its fullest potential.
yeah. Like you don't water a plant or give it sunlight, it doesn't develop the right way. There's like examples like putting a child in front of a TV during a really early period of development, and they're in front of the TV all the time, their vision may not develop depth perception as well. I think there were studies on that too, where like because they're in front of a screen, right, and not in real life, right, they weren't able to, their eyes and brain didn't develop depth perception, so the ability to perceive kind of, you know what I mean, something
Yeah.
to that degree. So yeah, I think the key thing is, right, the brain needs to develop. I think so. This ties into genetics, and it ties into nurture, like nurture versus nature. Nature's genetics, and then nurture is like being in society, being taught things, being exposed to stimuli, right? So like the TV thing. like I guess what we're getting at is the brain is going through a critical development period to where it needs to learn or needs certain stimuli to enter like through the eyes or ears or something like that to make trigger certain mechanisms in the brain. So it's like the environment and the stimuli in the environment is working collaboratively with the genetics and all that stuff in the brain,
Yeah.
form, those extremely important domains like vision, language. Yeah.
And it's almost as if those critical the critical period, what we call critical period, is probably maybe just the organism or the human being, understanding how what things are necessary to live in the world that they're surrounded by, basically.
But I think it also calls into question like why though? Why are there certain brain areas that are almost like designed or like predisposed to develop those specific areas? Like there's specific areas of the brain for vision and for like hearing and for like decision making and morality. So like why isn't that strange? It's like there's a blueprint when we're born for the brain, but when that blueprint isn't filled out with the environment, like vision like doesn't develop the right way. It's really really strange. Like, and if you believe in God, then you could say, well, maybe it's just the way God designed the brain, right? It's like there's just these specific areas that are pre-designed, for those areas, and if you don't learn them, then they kind of just don't develop right. I just think that's so.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of
Yeah,
deal.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You don't use your vision like with the kittens, then you kind of lose it. That area just kind of doesn't form, I guess. The connections,
Yeah.
you know.
Do you ever wonder if there's areas in the brain that if we knew about, that could be developed, would would we develop? Like, is there an area in the brain that we've never developed
That's an
fully?
interesting question,
You
actually.
know?
Because when we think about it, right, critical development periods, and what if there's, yeah, like we use vision, right? We use all this stuff like language, and that's why it develops. And we know that if we don't practice language, it doesn't develop, and then it never will. Supposedly, it doesn't seem to. So yeah, what you're saying, you're going even a step further. Like, what if we're doing all these things now, but there's something else we're not doing, and we're not
Yeah.
developing something else that's there? That's a good question.
Yeah, because maybe we just never realized that we lose it in the process,
Yeah,
but we never develop it.
we wouldn't know any better. Like if we had to go into the fifth dimension or something. You know?
Yeah, yeah, something crazy. I don't know. It leaves it's something that I wonder right now. Just like, because like you said, the development of our brain and our body is focused on both the environment and our biology, right? Both co in hand, create our existence in a way, or at least the necessary skills in areas of the brain that are necessary for social interaction and for living in the world. But you know, if there was something more, that we just never realized that was there.
Yeah, how would we know? We wouldn't know, right? Like,
Yeah, how would we know? Yeah, because we've just considered ourselves normal all along.
well, and a big philosophical question too is like, when did the language area come to be? Because we obviously as human beings, like if it depends on what you believe, right? But like language maybe didn't exist at a certain point in time, or if you don't believe in God, then you would believe that language did not exist um, in the early humans or something like that. So it's like, at what point in human span did language in the brain develop that area for the area in the brain designed for language? Because it seems like there is a kind of a specific general area in the brain for language, and of course, it's multiple things working together too. It's not that simple. Or I'm trying to think of other examples, but however, if you believe in God, then like it's a little bit different because you're when Adam and Eve were there, right? There was language already there, and then you could assume that it was built in, and It's just kind of filling in those gaps when we're born. Like we start out as a clean slate, and not everyone really believes that, or it's kind of, I guess, debatable that we're born with a clean slate in our brain, and then as the environment we experience it, things develop. I guess the mystery is like, why does it develop in only certain areas? If we're all different people, it's kind of strange too, I think. But
And it could be, the fact that, part of it is culture, part of it is, you know, really like the environment that shapes us in a way, which
yeah,
is very interesting, because when you start getting into life expectancies, you start realizing that certain areas in the world can develop higher life expectancies than other geographic areas. And it comes to question like, well, why? And then it's, well, like the food that is around them, the way that they think about the world as well helps, sometimes like uh see the world differently, and maybe that causes for people to not be too stressed about money or too stressed about life, or you just don't live in a really busy area, and so life just kind of flows by a little bit slower, and you can live in the moment kind of deal. And so I think you brought up a really interesting point about how kids, have screens on their face, even as little kids, whenever a kid starts crying, sometimes, me working with kids, a lot of parents just give them the phone, and then, they have the screen. And so I wonder, what that's doing in their critical period, because sometimes they're just babies. They're just babies,
yeah, it can.
not even a year old, and they put the little TV on
Yeah,
them.
I mean,
It's like, well,
from what I understand, like at a very early age like that, it can create problems with vision potentially, and a lot of I know some counselors that advise against that because probably for that very reason. You know,
yeah,
the eyes have to develop the way they've always developed throughout human existence. And we have to admit and come to grips with screens are not natural. They're not a natural way, right, to develop.
yeah,
So yeah, definitely.
nice.
I think my
Well, do you
final,
have any?
yeah,
Yeah,
final things on that, like, yeah, I think it's just such a mystery, like I think this whole genetic and nurture thing is very interesting, and it seems to make the most sense. Like we need I think it's fascinating though. I think it's extremely fascinating when you think about the fact that the environment and things in the environment and stimuli in the environment come through our five senses and physically change the brain through genetics and all of that stuff that works by turning on and off certain proteins and all that stuff in those structures. I just think that's so fascinating when you really think about it. Like this, and now I'm like existential like stuff, man. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But like this world that we're in has a physical effect on our brain, on our mind, on our consciousness. It's just to me, I don't understand. Like I feel like a lot of people take that for granted, but it's fascinating because it's very real. We think of it as this very strange fantasy thing that happens, with a blind eye, but no, it's like it really is a very physical thing. Like thing like seeing like something that doesn't feel physical at all because we experience it all the time coming in changes the brain like it really does. So I think that's just fascinating. It really is. I don't know. What are your final kind of what do you think?
yeah. I think, like you said, it's just, that critical period for kids is definitely very important. I would say, I think I've heard it's somewhere from like birth to like almost 15 years old, um, or 13, somewhere around there. Uh,
Programming.
yeah, that's where the programming happens. But there's certainly like some parts, um, in the first couple of years of life that definitely kind of set the foundation of how life is going to be for that individual person. And so it's definitely something worth looking into, because, especially nowadays where we have so many abnormal cases where kids can be born in any sort of circumstance that one can think of. It really comes to question like, well, how are we as humans helping those kids, and maybe even like we kind of talked about, maybe it's there areas that we have never looked into that could be developed even further, but we
Exactly.
just never really looked into it.
Right.
So
Exactly. Makes you think.
yeah.
And after I couldn't find this mouse for years, and it was in my filing cabinet the whole time. It was in the yep. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching towards the end of this video. If you liked our video, please leave us a comment and a like down below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more information like this. And until next time, we will talk to you soon. Take care.